grounding us in that way and just getting us to settle in. I know that was very useful for me. And yeah, kia ora, haere mai to Future Whenua Summit. Ko Zeb toko Whenua. Yeah, I'm Zeb, and yeah, I grew up in northern Southland on a sheep farm, and yeah, just like so grateful to be born into like a rural lifestyle and grow up on a farm. There's just like such a richness of opportunity to express your creativity in unique ways, really practical ways. Yeah, you develop like a skill set and an agency. Yeah, I was telling Helena the other day about yeah, this like time we were like 15 years old, just getting our learner's licenses, and me and a mate had this sort of paddock racer, and we were like hitting this sort of flood bank and like getting air and like starting to get like 10 meters of air in this car, and it's just like, what sort of upbringing allows that as an opportunity? And yeah, I'm not saying that's like the crux of farm life, of course. It's but it does, yeah, I just guess I bring that up as like, a lot of us think that like the comfort and ease and access to entertainment and the like draw of urban centers and like city life, which is just like the trajectory of what humanity's doing. A lot more coastal megacities, a lot less people living on small holdings on the land. That's kind of a trajectory that we need to start to reverse. And so, yeah, growing up on the Montana Flat, we're a 1,000-acre sheep farm. We had 5,000 sheep. And yeah, my old man was just like a clinical farmer, really farming to the KPIs, yeah, like high production, you know, he's like a quality operator, as was his father. You know, we moved on to the Montana Flat near Riversdale, Southland. It's alongside the Matolda River and beneath the Hokanui mountain range. And it was kind of like a grass desert, and they started to like slow down the like impressive winds by planting shelter belts and making the sort of management of the land a little easier by breaking it off into square paddocks with a central lane system. And that's kind of like the pioneering phase of the agricultural movement, and it allows us to sort of do what happens kind of innately in New Zealand agriculture, which is like a rotational grazing model. And so when we're starting to think about like regenerative farming, which is one of the core pillars of Future Whenua in this gathering, it's like New Zealand does have a bit of a head start to some other parts of the world, which are, you know, naturally set stock and yeah, just like because of our beautiful climate and like year-round production or almost year-round production in various regions of the country, it just gives us like a little bit of an opportunity. But that doesn't mean we can't be complacent and can't find rooms to improve, such as what we've just seen around on the tour with Richie and Jack. And so we've had Future Whenua Summit here and shifted it around a couple of different properties. We're at Greg Hart's incredible Mangarara station in the Hawke's Bay. Last year we were in Northland, and we've done it a couple times at home on the farm. And then selecting Lake Hawea Station was just an obvious choice because of their diverse operations. You know, we heard about the agri-tourism systems, we heard of the diversity they're employing in their pasture and winter crops. And it's like those are the type of principles and philosophies that are really yeah, core to what we're here to talk about, and what I guess I'd like to be like the farming narrative, at least in the Future Whenua, that yeah, I think we're all aligned around. And so I was thinking this like opening session on the Friday was just kind of about like setting the scene, setting the context, and I wasn't sure exactly how far back to go, so I thought we'd go way back to about 13 billion years ago, when everything that we know, the known universe, was condensed into like an infinitely hot, infinitely dense state. And then bang, and a rapid expansion, and things started to collide, and you know, the whole known world, the elements, the matter, the energy, this cosmic canvas that we all are aware of, all started to merge and push out. And then so for about 9 billion years there was just like a huge amount of like collisions and star formations and collapse and black holes, and somewhere in a sort of distant, you know, galaxy far away, around a relatively insignificant star that we know as the beautiful sun, this landmass, the Earth started to form and started to form a bit more of like a regular orbit in such a way that it allowed some of the ice sheets to melt and like allowed the oceans to form. And so for billions of years, it just took this really chaotic and spread out and like just starting to form some order. And about 4 billion years ago, when the ocean started to stabilize, emerged this beautiful thing called life. And we don't know of any other existence of life in the known universe or the multiverse. As far as we've been able to tell, it's just here. And so we don't know what sparked that. It could have been God, it could have been life itself, it could have come from some other part of the universe. But what we do know is it's really precious, because we have looked and we've probed and we've sensed pretty far out there, and we know that we're in a really unique environment here with our stable orbit, with our stable rotation, and just so through that development from the 4 billion years of just like single cellular life found only in the oceans, took a very long time to sort of multiply, and it wasn't till about 600 million years ago, the time of the Cambrian explosion, when that life started to really rapidly increase, and we started to find all sorts of multicellular, and complexity was developing, and we'd find fish and early ancestors. And then about 500 million years ago, that life started to creep on land, first as the plant kingdom, which were forming unique relationships with lichen and the rocks, and they would sort of come on and starting to form interesting sort of ways of breaking down this like hard rock that was found everywhere else, and starting to form this humic layer, which would eventually form into soil and allow more plants to go. 50 more million years later, the plant kingdom allowed space for soil, for more plants, for the animals to arrive. And then the cycle started to continue and complexify. And through that time, there's like been a series of mass extinctions that we know about, where anything from 75 to up to 95% of all of the life that had been generating complexity got eradicated, and that came from like ice ages and meteors. The most commonly was the most recent one, in which the Chicxulub asteroid hit and wiped out all of the dinosaurs and about 80% of all life as was existing there. From that sort of remaining of each of these great deaths, these great extinctions, has been a proliferation. So it's been like a great reduction in the complexity, and then out the other side of it, things are able to expand and expand. And it wasn't until after the dinosaurs had been eroded, and then the next cycle of life, about 50 million years ago, that we finally found grass. And it's hard to imagine a world without grass, but it's a relatively new thing. And alongside with that came the humble mammal. And that started as small rodents and then grew and diversified into things like the mammoth, saber-toothed tigers, all the mammals that we know today, including one particularly clever species of primate, the Homo sapiens. And so we sort of came onto the scene about 300,000 years ago. And with our well-developed neofrontal cortexes and dexterous thumbs and such, we developed things like fire and the wheel and language. And eventually we developed the plow, which allowed us to turn over the soil, and all of these annual plant species that we had been foraging for in the wild, we were starting to gather, and we could plant them where we designed them. And that was the birth of civilization. And it was also a real turning point from humans being part of this cycle of life that had been just emerging and evolving and becoming more and more complex over time, to starting to be a bit more further removed. And then as humanity and civilization has grown and expanded, particularly around 10,000 years ago, we really started to hone in on the use of the plow and the domestication of a whole variety of plant and animal species, that we really started to cement ourselves as the masters of the earth. So we had a few revolutions beyond fire and language, the Industrial Revolution being the most recent, and a lot of that's just like cemented and empowered the human enterprise, but it's come at a cost to the nature and the earth. And so especially in recent years, like in the last century, in the time that some of you have been alive, we've had a reduction of like 70% of life on Earth. And that includes insects, mammals, birds, fish, sperm counts. There's this sort of seems to be a magic number between 50 and 70 that across all of those different kingdoms, we've lost that complexity in about the last 60 years. And that's really terrifying because apart from like maybe one or two of those examples of the great extinctions, they've usually happened over century and millennia. And this is just happening at a rapid pace before our eyes. And a lot of it is as a direct result of our actions, as a direct result of the plow and how that's prolificated into the mindsets that we held and the extractive culture where we're just sort of using and consuming more and more of the Earth's resources to prop up humanity at the cost of the rest of the beauty and the nature of life. And so I guess I'm just sort of placing that broader context because there's been this cycle that's sort of been moving into more complexity, and if we are in the middle of the sixth great extinction, we can hold a hope that out the other side, maybe some of the crazy stuff like we've done and you know, bringing exotic species into a culture like New Zealand, and who knows what might breed and form as a result, and just you know, huge power to move resources around. I'd like to hold hope that like out the other side of it can come another flourishing of the diversity of life, but we've really got the here and now to think about, and our action doesn't have to be this force of entropy. It can actually serve the complexity of life, and yeah, we can really be an agent for the beautification. It's not set in stone that we have to be the takers, be the extractors. And so we hear a lot about like the sort of environmental problem as in like the carbon narrative and just like how much atmospheric carbon and stuff, and this is the 5th Future Whenua Summit, and we've sort of managed to like skirt not talking about that once because I think it's a really overplayed aspect of the many issues that we're facing in the environment. There's something called the Planetary Boundaries Framework by the Stockholm Institute. I find it to be the most comprehensive analysis of the environmental situation we're in, and it's talking about things like nutrient loading and just like atmospheric pollution and yeah, like species loss and diversity. And so there's 7 out of the 9 that we've crossed, and that's a real problem if we want to keep on living the way we are, and if we want to start having like a 7-generational mindset in which actually that we can continue the sort of human movement in a way that's like really awesome that we all get to experience here and now. The good news is we're not here to talk about the problems. This is a group of solutioneers, and yeah, I just sort of wanted to set that framework as like we're all aware of some of the problems. It's not just environmental, there's socio-political, there's like economic, like real issues looming. And some of those, like whatever your thing is that you're worried about, a lot of it to me funnels to the same place. We need to really focus on like local ecosystems, local food systems. Yeah, the other thing that's good news is there's a way out of here, and we'll hear from some of the people who are working on some sort of social solutions, some ecological ones. And really I think the opportunity is to realign the human enterprise with the natural flows of life's evolutionary impulse. That thing that's been happening, that complexity, that just beauty, that sort of cycle where the output of one feeds into the input of another. There's a huge opportunity for us to mimic the design of our farms, of our forests, of our communities, just to like follow nature's patterns. And so at Future Whenua Summit, yeah, we've had like 4 years running, and we've covered all sorts of things. Initially we're imagining a bit more of like a farming festival, but just who's been showing up is just right across the spectrum. There's been people from like the policy space, from science, from education, and a whole bunch of land practitioners like across the field, corporate sustainability. And so we're kind of just having this really broad look at the regenerative movement. It's not about regenerative agriculture and simply the sort of multi-species crops or something that we saw before. There's an opportunity for each and every one of us, whether you're an AI coder or a nursery propagator, there's a huge opportunity for all of us to step up in this most like critical time and serve that beautification timeline of life as we know it. And so a few like core themes that we've been talking about, one of them would be like this balance of sort of ancestral wisdom and more like modern ways of knowing. And that's kind of felt in our name, Future Whenua. It's like sometimes future has this sort of technological and sharp and aspirational kind of connotation. And Whenua, which is the te reo term for land, bringing te reo in just talks to some of those like more indigenous, grounded ways of thinking and operating and being with one another and with the earth. And so it's like this balance of sort of technology and like data driven, which allows us to really be specific and sharp, but also a more like practical intuition that we can find by having our bare feet on the ground and by closing our eyes and giving thanks to the four directions and hearing like what is the course of action from ways like that. There's like a use for science and there's a use for our practical intuition. And when people sort of stand up in resistance to the regenerative agricultural movement, you hear so often, where's the science? Where's the data? There's actually so much of it out there. When I first started researching this stuff, there's guys like Graham Sate and Dr. Christina Jones, and it's just like the science around why is the diversity good for ecosystem health and good for soil health and good for the bottom line. There's been so much people working on that and publishing it. There is a heap of science for the regenerative movement. But there's also stuff that's just like, what are you waiting for? And from our example of like the regenerative transition on our sheep farm, we started doing stuff like the multi-species crops that we saw out there. And down in Southland, one of the real issues is this thing called mud farming. Because we have about 3 months of the year that grass isn't producing, during the summer, that's why we produce like a feed crop like that, because it stores sugars and metabolizable energy in a way that we can feed out in like June and July when there's not as much pasture growth. And when we do that in wet places like Southland, because particularly if we use a monoculture, like and a brassica like Swede doesn't have the same relationships with like mycorrhizal fungi. And so you put on 1,000 hoggets onto a break and it starts raining for a couple of days. It leads into a heap of like mud and pugging, and that water flows off into streams, and there's a lot of issues. And that's why environmentalists decide that that's a good time to get out their drones and take footage of it. And it demonizes the farmer in a way that it's like potentially not fair. Like that sometimes these happen as a real like environmental issue, like we're getting way heavier rains than we used to, and so farmers really are managing to the best of their ability. But there's simple practices that we can find, like adding in sunflowers, rye corn, phacelia into our winter crop mixes. And from my experience, where I used to be, you know, wearing like my red bands up to here, and you're feeding the brake and you're taking a couple of steps and moving a standard along, and like it would just like suck your gumboot right off your foot. So once we started adding in those really fibrous crops like the sunflower and the rye corn, I could shift the winter brakes in my gym shoes, and I was just like literally out there doing it. And I'm just thinking, wow, I'm just walking along, actually stepping on some of these fibrous plants that's keeping me on top. And then I'm looking at the 1,000 hoggets beside me and seeing that that's happening to them to the same. And so we had this intention while doing that. And earlier in the spring and the autumn, you know, as we just saw out there before, such a diversity of insect life. You could like hear it. You could hear Ryan's drone as well, but you could actually hear that hum of the bees and the bumbles, and you see these parasitic wasps. So we set out with this intention to create a feed source for things like the parasitic wasp that would eat the aphid, so we don't have to spray really toxic insecticides all over all over the land. And then like we just saw it work, and then we set out with this intention to create a ground cover that would keep the sheep off from digging into it, and it worked. And it was like, do I really have to wait for a 5-year paper to tell me the science that no one's going to read anyway? Or can I invite some of my neighbors over and say, let's have a look, come out and shift the brakes with me and see what you think. How does this compare to your experience yesterday morning? And so part of what's cool about like gatherings like this and being able to get out there and see it is it's just like once you've been in there, that is a felt experience that not many people actually get to be a part of. And so that's another part of like what future whenua is all about. First, there was that sort of dynamic of the like, yeah, science is really important. And we can see by doing like a hot water soluble test and sending that away to Hills Laboratories that yes, in fact, there is more fungal life and there is more bacterial activity of the type that we're desiring as a result of these diverse species. But we've also got this real practical knowing by just like seeing and observing, and that sort of farmer observation is like really awesome science. And then there's this part about like, yeah, bringing us together to have conversations, to share what's worked for us, to share our experiences. And so, yeah, throughout the weekend, I think it's like over by the coffee table that the real learning gets done. But we do have some just amazing speakers and some like really just like unique and yeah, very intentional topics that we're going to go through over the next few days. I think I'm going to sort of wrap up there, but I just would like to finish with sort of the way that Helena set us off, which would be another real core aspect of like what future whenua is. It's like, it's a shifting in values, and it's not, I'm not saying future whenua as in this is like our space. It's sort of the embodiment of like the regenerative movement as a whole, but it's that focus on profitability and bottom lines and maximizing weaning weights or corn yields or whatever it is that we're traditionally focused in the ag sector. We really have to bring in a broader set of metrics, because the context that my generation are stepping into as land stewards and farmers is an entirely different context than that's happened in the last couple of generations. And if we're trying to focus purely on maximizing yields for a commodity global market, or when some of the like uncertainties as we move from this like really stable climate into like more and more droughts or storms or weather events, as we move into time of like less stable supply of energy and fuel, we're going to have to really get close to like our local area and think about like, are we sourcing our inputs from a place that like we can rely upon, or are we relying on like a really, really complex global supply chain? Are we doing this because it serves ourselves, because it serves our bottom line, so then we can make a profit, especially in a good year, and then go out and buy a boat and like have a good time and have a real comfortable life? Or are we doing it in service to something that's a bit greater? Are we tuning in to that evolutionary impulse, which has been growing and complexifying for a very long time, that we just happen to be the most like intelligent, wonderful minds, like creative actors in this cycle with such a potential to have an influence, to make a difference, to support the syntropic cycle rather than the entropic cycle? Are we doing this because we love the earth, because we love the life? Because if we're doing it for data, and if we're doing it for profitability, and we're trying to convince ourselves through some layer of abstraction, it's going to fall apart somewhere. If we're doing it because we're really reflecting on who are we, why are we here, I think you would like eventually get to an answer that's something like, we're a part of this beautiful cycle and we're here to serve it in whatever ways we can. And I'd encourage each and every one of you just to like reattune to that, because I think we all here are a part of the regenerative movement, and that's not the easy option. The easy option is like get a wage, get an income, buy stuff, have a comfortable life. The more difficult, the real challenge is to step out of that and say, I'm going to use my life, my like precious time here on earth, to serve something greater than myself. And so, yeah, one other part that just like I get some questions and haven't really spoken to that well is just like the sort of pay what you can model, and like why aren't we selling tickets to an event that's like clearly, you know, fully catered and put a lot into. And that's because the economic system, the neoliberal capitalism that we're all a part of, is like the fundamental glue of the entropic cycle that humanity's obsessed with, the extractive mindset. And it's just like what motivates Helena and I to spend 10 hours in the kitchen yesterday is nothing to do with making a profit. It's to do with like, we want to bring people together, to have smiles, to strengthen this community. And I think we can start to like take our actions motivated from something more intrinsic than, than where they're often found in modernity. With that model, we totally are willing for your koha, because it does allow us to continue. And definitely appreciate everyone who has done that, and would encourage you to do that. And if you're not in that way, then like pay it forward in some other way in your community. Grow some food, turn up to a local planting day, help some grandma bottle a relish, and learn some skills. It's just like, yeah, now's the time to be skilling up, because we're still in this time of a lot of comfort, and we don't know if that's going to last us until we're all, you know, grey and old. So like, yeah, use your time wisely. Have an awesome weekend. Thank you all so much for being here. And yeah, kia ora.